The first thing he noticed was the sound, not the steady patter of rain against his windshield, but a sharper rhythm. Claws tapping on asphalt, the soft scrape of paws dragging in mud. The man slowed his car, wipers smearing blurred shapes into trembling shadows. And there, in the halo of his headlights, lay the figure that made his chest tighten. A German shepherd, collapsed at the edge of the road, his coat matted and soaked through, as if he had been left to dissolve into the storm. The dog did not lift his head when the car stopped. His body shivered in violent waves, each tremor more desperate than the last. Rain pooled in the hollow of his ribs, trickling down fur that should have been proud, glossy, alive. But here it was, broken, starved, beaten down by days of hunger and cold. The man's hand lingered on the ignition key, torn between instinct and hesitation. He had heard the warnings before: never approach a stray in distress, never pull over in a storm. But those eyes, when the dog finally lifted them, they pierced through fog and fear alike. They weren't the eyes of a beast, they were the eyes of someone who had been waiting, silently pleading, for a door that might never open. For a long moment he sat in the dry silence of the car, watching the animal fight the storm with nothing but fragile breath. His heart argued with his reason. What if the dog lashed out? What if he carried disease? What if, by helping, he stepped into trouble he wasn't prepared to shoulder? The man thought of his small apartment, already too cramped for the life he led. He thought of the cost, the sleepless nights, the scars that rescues leave not only on bodies but on souls. Yet the longer he looked, the more unbearable the stillness outside became. Because beneath that rain-soaked fur there was a life suspended on a thread. If he drove away, it would snap before morning, and he would carry that silence with him forever. He opened the door. The wind slapped his face with icy rain, drenching him in seconds. He crouched low, palms open, voice trembling as he called out, "Hey, hey, buddy, it's okay, it's okay." The dog's ears twitched, a fragile spark of awareness, but his body remained curled and still. When the man stepped closer, the dog flinched, pushing feebly against the ground as though expecting another blow. His nails scraped the pavement, his breath ragged with panic. "Easy," he whispered, his own voice cracking now. He lowered himself to his knees in the puddle, letting the cold water seep through denim. He extended his hand and waited. The moment stretched thin as wire. The dog's eyes darted between the stranger's face and the trembling hand, searching for betrayal, for danger. Rain blurred the line between fear and hope. Then, with a shiver that seemed to shake loose his last ounce of strength, the shepherd inched his muzzle forward. He pressed his nose against the man's skin, so lightly it felt more like a memory than a touch. The man exhaled, breath fogging in the cold air. His hand slid beneath the dog's chin, feeling bones too sharp beneath the skin, the faint vibration of teeth chattering. He moved carefully, wrapping his other arm beneath the ribcage, lifting the limp body against his chest. The dog whimpered once, a sound so fragile it seemed to fracture the night, but then he went still, as though surrendering his fate to the warmth that carried him. The man stumbled back to the car, heart pounding with urgency. Each step felt like a battle against gravity, the dog's weight heavy not in body, but in meaning. He laid him across the passenger seat, where rainwater soaked instantly into the upholstery. The dog's eyes half closed, his breaths shallow, uneven. "Stay with me," the man muttered, fumbling for the ignition. His voice rose louder, almost pleading, as if words alone could anchor the dog to this world. Headlights cut through the storm again as the car lurched forward. The road ahead blurred, yet each second felt stretched unbearably long. The man's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, ears straining for the sound of breath beside him. Each pause between inhales felt like the end. The dog coughed suddenly, a wet, rasping sound that made the man flinch with both fear and relief. He reached over, one hand brushing the dog's trembling flank, grounding them both in that fragile rhythm of life. As the city lights grew nearer, the storm seemed to fade into background noise. The man's thoughts shifted between desperation and fragile determination. He did not know the dog's name, his story, the years that had carved hollows into his body. He knew only this: he had been found in the rain, shivering, waiting, and tonight fate had chosen to place them on the same road. When he pulled into the harsh glow of the emergency vet's parking lot, his chest tightened again. Would they be too late? Would this night end with cold hands and unanswered questions? The man lifted the shepherd once more, pressing his face against wet fur, whispering words that were as much for himself as for the animal. "You're safe now. Just hold on. Please, just hold on."
The clinic doors hissed open, a blast of sterile light cutting through the storm. The man hurried inside, cradling the dog against his chest, his jeans dripping water across the white tile. A nurse at the desk froze for half a second, then rushed forward, snapping into motion. "Emergency intake!" she called, and within seconds 2 techs appeared, sliding the shepherd onto a gurney. The man's arms felt suddenly empty, cold. He reached instinctively, but they were already wheeling the dog through swinging doors that snapped shut, leaving him in the silence of the waiting room. He stood there, shivering, palms still damp with rain and fur. His shirt clung to him, heavy with water, but he barely felt the cold anymore. What he felt was the hollow thud of his heart and the echo of a whimper that might have been the dog's last. Minutes dragged like hours. The rain outside pounded against glass windows, each drop ticking like a clock he could not stop. He paced, sat, rose again, his breath fogging the air. Every sound from behind the closed doors jolted his nerves. The clang of metal trays, muffled voices, the faint beep of a monitor. Finally, the vet emerged, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and steady hands. She removed her gloves slowly, as though bracing herself before speaking. "He's critical," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Severely dehydrated, malnourished, hypothermic. We're stabilizing his temperature, giving fluids, oxygen support, but—" She paused, weighing her next words. "We can't promise he'll make it through the night." The man swallowed hard, his throat burning. "Do whatever it takes," he said, the words breaking halfway. The vet nodded once and disappeared again. Hours stretched, bending time into something cruel. The man leaned forward in his chair, head in his hands, imagining the shepherd alone on a steel table under harsh light. He thought of the rain pooling in the dog's ribs, of the eyes that had trusted him in that single, fragile moment. He had carried him out of the storm. Would fate let him keep that promise? At last a nurse approached, her shoes squeaking on the tile. "You can see him now, but only for a minute." The man rose quickly, his body stiff from waiting. She led him into a dim room where machines hummed softly. The shepherd lay on a thin blanket, an IV taped to his leg, a warming pad beneath his fragile frame. His fur was still damp, his breathing shallow, each rise and fall of his chest tethered to the rhythm of the oxygen mask. The man moved closer, his hand trembling as he reached for the dog's paw. It was cold still, but no longer lifeless. He stroked the fur gently, whispering, "You're safe now. You're not alone anymore." For a moment, nothing changed. The shepherd remained still, his eyes closed, his body surrendered to exhaustion. But then, so slight it could have been imagined, his paw twitched against the man's palm, a faint pressure like the ghost of a grip. Tears burned the man's eyes. That tiny movement carried more weight than words ever could. It was not surrender. It was fight. The vet re-entered, watching quietly. "That's a good sign," she said softly. "He's responding." She adjusted the IV, then added, "But the next 24 hours will decide everything." The man nodded, his throat too tight to answer. When he finally left the room, he felt both heavier and lighter. He carried the weight of uncertainty, but also a fragile thread of hope. The shepherd had not let go. Outside, the storm had begun to ease. The rain softened to a mist, and for the first time all night, a break in the clouds revealed a faint glow of moonlight. He stood under it, closing his eyes, letting the cool air wash over him. Somewhere behind those walls, a broken life was fighting to return. And though dawn was still hours away, something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, they would see it together.
The morning after felt like stepping into another life. The man arrived at the clinic before sunrise, his stomach knotted with dread. The hallways were quiet, the air heavy with antiseptic, the low hum of fluorescent lights pressing down like a weight. He braced himself for the worst, for the possibility that his choice the night before had come too late. But when the nurse opened the door to the recovery room, he froze. The shepherd was still there, alive. His chest rose and fell, slow but steady, his body curled under a fleece blanket. A patch of fur had been shaved on his foreleg for the IV, revealing skin too thin, veins too fragile. Yet his eyes, those hollow, rain-soaked eyes from last night, were open now, watching him. He swallowed hard, his breath catching. "Hey," he whispered, stepping closer, afraid even his voice might shatter this fragile moment. "You made it." The shepherd didn't move, didn't lift his head, but his gaze followed every step. His ears twitched once, as if remembering what it felt like to listen to a world that had been cruel for far too long. The vet entered quietly behind him. "She's stable," she said, her voice calm but not without caution. "The fever broke overnight. Hydration is improving, but he's weak, dangerously underweight. Recovery will be long and uncertain." The man nodded, never taking his eyes from the dog. "I'll be here," he said, almost without thinking. The words rose not from obligation but from something deeper, a promise born the moment those eyes met his through the rain. For the next several days, his life narrowed into a rhythm. Mornings at the clinic, evenings waiting by the phone, nights lying awake imagining the sound of labored breath. The shepherd's progress came in whispers, not shouts. A sip of water without choking, a flicker of the tail against the blanket, the faintest lift of the head when footsteps entered the room. Each moment was a fragile victory, balanced against constant setbacks. Twice, the dog's temperature dropped suddenly, alarms ringing as techs rushed to stabilize him. Once his heart rhythm faltered, and for agonizing minutes the man thought he would lose him. But each time the shepherd clawed his way back, fragile but unbroken. The man began to talk to him softly during visits, not with the brightness one might use for a puppy, but with the hushed reverence of someone speaking to a soul teetering between worlds. He told him about the rain the night they met, about how close he had been to driving past, about how impossible that silence would have been to live with. He told him about the small apartment waiting, about the warm blankets and food bowls, about the life he hoped could be rebuilt. The shepherd listened. His ears twitched, his eyes softened, his breath slowed when the man's hand rested against his paw. Trust did not arrive all at once, but like light seeping through cracks, faint, uneven, but growing. On the 5th day, the vet allowed him to try feeding the shepherd soft food by hand. The bowl sat untouched on the tray, steam curling upward, filling the air with the smell of chicken broth. The man dipped his fingers,
lifting a small morsel toward the shepherd's muzzle. For a long time, nothing happened. The dog turned his head slightly, nostrils flaring, suspicion still stronger than hunger. The man's heart ached. He could almost hear the unspoken thought behind those wary eyes. I've been offered kindness before, and it never lasted. But then, almost imperceptibly, the shepherd leaned forward. His tongue brushed against the man's fingertips, pulling the morsel into his mouth. He chewed weakly, swallowed, and then, astonishingly, nudged the man's hand again. The man laughed through the lump in his throat, tears mixing with relief. "That's it," he whispered. "That's it. Buddy, you're still here. You're still fighting." From that moment, something shifted. The shepherd began to eat, not much, but enough. He began to sit up for minutes at a time, though his legs trembled like twigs in wind. Each day the man walked him slowly down the hallway, supporting him with gentle hands, letting him feel the ground beneath his paws again. The staff watched with quiet amazement. They had seen many strays come and go, many battles fought and lost. But something about this bond, the way the shepherd's eyes followed the man wherever he went, the way the man bent his entire world around this fragile recovery, gave them pause. One afternoon, as the man guided the dog back to his blanket, the vet approached, her expression softer now. "He trusts you," she said simply. "That may be the only reason he's still alive." The man looked down at the shepherd, who leaned heavily against his leg, eyes half closed in exhaustion. "Then I can't let him down," he replied. But even as progress shone brighter, fear lingered in the corners. At night, the man still woke to the memory of rain and shallow breaths, haunted by how close he had come to losing him. Every cough, every pause between inhales, carried a shadow. Recovery was not a straight road. It was a cliffside path, narrow and fragile, with the abyss of loss always just a step away. But with each passing day, the shepherd proved that life, no matter how battered, still carries a stubborn will to rise. And as the man sat beside him one evening, feeling the warmth of fur against his hand, he realized that what had begun as a choice in the rain was becoming something far greater. It was not just rescue. It was rebirth. And though the future was still uncertain, there was one truth that neither storm nor shadow could erase. They were no longer walking alone.
The clinic had begun to feel less like a hospital and more like a sanctuary. The shepherd was walking now, his steps unsteady but purposeful, each paw placed with the caution of someone learning to trust the ground again. The man had grown used to the rhythm of progress, tiny victories celebrated, setbacks endured, hope stitched into each new day. But hope has a way of testing itself. It was late one evening when the storm returned, not outside this time, but within. The man had stopped by after work, as he always did, carrying a blanket from home that still smelled faintly of laundry soap and the small apartment waiting for them both. The shepherd was lying quietly, his breathing steady, his eyes half closed in the kind of peaceful drowsiness that had once seemed impossible. The man reached down, rubbing his ear, whispering, "Almost there, buddy, almost ready to come home." That was when it happened. The shepherd coughed, once, then again, a harsh, rattling sound that pulled the man upright. His chest heaved, eyes wide with panic, his body trembling violently. The beeping monitors jumped into a frenzy, the oxygen levels plummeted. "Help!" The man's voice cracked, rising higher than he knew it could. "Somebody!" The door burst open, nurses rushed in, the vet close behind, her calm veneer stripped away by urgency. "Respiratory failure," she called, snapping orders as techs adjusted tubes, prepared injections, swung equipment into place. The man was shoved gently aside, but he couldn't leave. He stood frozen at the wall, hands clenched, heart thundering, watching his world, the fragile life he had pulled from the rain, buckle again. The shepherd gasped, a sound like air fighting against drowning lungs. His body convulsed, legs kicking weakly as though running from something unseen. The vet pressed a stethoscope to his chest, her brow furrowing deeply. "Collapsed lung," she muttered almost to herself. "We need to drain it now." The man's breath caught. A collapsed lung. Words that sounded like finality, like endings. The vet turned briefly toward him. "We need consent. It's invasive, and he may not survive the procedure." The room tilted around him. In seconds he had to choose. The weight of it crushed his chest. Risk everything on a desperate chance, or let go now, sparing the shepherd more suffering. But when he looked into those eyes, wide, terrified, clinging, he knew. This dog had fought too hard to stop here. "Do it," the man whispered, then louder, firmer. "Do it! Save him!" The team moved like a storm themselves, swift and precise. A needle slid between ribs, a hiss of trapped air escaping, the sound both horrifying and miraculous. The shepherd whined once, then stilled, his chest rising more evenly under the vet's steady hand. Monitors steadied, beeps falling back into rhythm. The man's knees weakened, his palms pressed against the wall to keep from collapsing. For long minutes he barely breathed, waiting for the final verdict in the silence that followed. At last the vet removed her gloves, her face lined with exhaustion, but touched by a faint smile. "He's stable now," she said quietly. "For now." The man closed his eyes, tears burning, relief flooding so violently it left him trembling. Later, when the chaos had ebbed and the room fell quiet again, he was allowed back to the shepherd's side. The dog was wrapped in blankets, tubes still tethering him, his breaths shallow but no longer desperate. His eyes fluttered open when the man sat beside him, as if even through pain and sedation he recognized the presence he had come to trust. The man reached down, rubbing his forehead lightly against the shepherd's. "You scared me," he whispered, voice breaking. "Don't do that again, please." For a moment there was only silence, then the faintest flicker of the tail beneath the blanket, a fragile thump against the table. It was small, almost invisible, but it was enough. That night the man didn't leave. He sat in the hard chair, the blanket from home draped across his lap, his hand resting gently against the shepherd's side to feel the rise and fall of breath. Hours passed in slow rhythm. Beeps, sighs, silence. At times the fear clawed back, whispering of loss, of how fragile this thread still was. But every time the tail flicked, every time the chest rose, he held tighter to hope. By dawn, exhaustion had carved deep shadows under his eyes, but his heart carried something steadier than before, because the shepherd had survived again, not by luck, not by chance, but by the same stubborn will that had carried him through the rain. The vet stopped by in the early morning, her gaze softer now. "He's not out of danger," she said gently. "But if he can survive this, his chances of full recovery grow much stronger." The man nodded, looking down at the dog curled against the blanket, his chest rising in steady rhythm once more. "He's a fighter. He always has been," she quietly said. The vet smiled faintly. "So are you." Outside, the storm clouds were breaking. Light spilled through the windows in fractured beams, falling across the shepherd's fur, turning damp strands into threads of gold. The man sat there watching the light touch him, and realized that for the first time since that night on the roadside, he believed in something larger than fear. They were not at the end yet, but the worst of the night had passed, and with every breath, the shepherd was telling him the same truth. As long as they had each other, neither storm nor silence could take this life away.